Well, good morning. Do that again. Good morning. All right. Make sure everybody's awake. Well, thank you all for being here. Just welcome everyone to our Subcommittee of Appropriations on the overview of the Department of Corrections. This is our first meeting, and as the speaker said in his announcement of this committee, just to keep us in line and in tune with the happenings in the Department of Corrections for any future appropriations that may be requested for this budget coming up. And we are doing that and trying to stay completely informed as to the findings in the study that's being done in the overview of corrections by the governor's office. And this is our first update, and we look forward to hearing from the commissioner and any of his team that may need to answer questions or present. And first, I will ask Representative Al Williams if he will open us, as we do almost every committee meeting in the House, open us up in prayer.
God, our Father, Jesus, our sustainer, we come this morning thanking you for all of the blessings. We thank you, Lord, for each member of this committee. We thank you for everyone that is in attendance. We ask, Lord, that we be able to keep in mind that whatever we do and say, you are in mind. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Williams. I guess let's just go ahead and kind of get started. I was thinking about doing opening comments from everybody, but I think everybody's anxious to hear what the commissioner has to say. And I know that we do have some, I think, members that are watching on Zoom, and it is being published or broadcast out in the world also on our network in the Capitol. So with no further ado, I'll call up Commissioner Tyrone Oliver. Are you going to do it from there? Okay. See if you're on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you see here, I have the team here with me, and they will kind of assist me in answering any questions that you all may have and or present as it relates to this hearing. And I appreciate you all just taking the time to, and the speaker also, to form this committee to kind of take a look at where our needs are and our concerns are as it relates to appropriations from the Department of Corrections, and also appreciate the governor and his team for the Guidehouse and Moss Group CGL partnership as well. I think it's very needed, much appreciated as we move forward. With that being said, as you all know, the Moss Group and Guidehouse, Moss Group, and CGL, the government assessment team, they're still conducting that assessment. Should have a draft report no later than late December, mid or late December. And so I'll be excited to see what those findings are and the recommendations that they may have as it relates to either appropriations and or continuous improvement of the department. But with that, I have a PowerPoint. I'm not sure if you guys have it in front of you. It's going to be broadcast up on the screen, and I'll just get right into it. All right. If you have it in front of you, I'll just run off my hard copy here. Just first want to talk about the mission of GDCs: protect Georgians by operating secure facilities and providing opportunities for offender rehabilitation. Our vision is achieving excellence through employee development, innovation, and collaboration. And then you see our core values of integrity, accountability, dedication. And my top 5 priorities: recruitment, retention, safe, secure facilities, employee development, wellness, innovation, and ACA accreditation. As you can see, between the mission, core values, and the vision, top priorities, really heavily focused on making sure what we're going to talk about today, putting the appropriations in 3 buckets and categories, whether it's staffing, healthcare, safety, security, and technology. Just kind of give you an agency overview on the next slide that you have in your packet. In November, you can see where our population sits. We're still hovering around about 49,000, almost 50,000 inmates that we have in our custody. And as you can see, the inmate population breakdown from state prisons, transitional centers, county institutions, private prisons, and then the overall. As I always point out, our violent population continues to hover around 74-75% of the total population, the violent population. Our offender population age, as you can see, our average age of offenders that we have in our custody is about 40 years old. The average sentence length overall for the total population is about 42 years that we have there.
Slow down.
Sorry.
I think we're going to ask questions as you go through that.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yes.
So looking at your inmate offender population, and members, if you want to ask questions, just hit your buttons and I'll turn you on. The overall physical utilization looks like you're at 93.7%. So that means 93% of your beds are full in our prisons, correct?
That's correct. We have about 2,500 beds offline. So we take that number out. And the reason why they're offline is for continued upgrades on dorms, lock and control systems, camera upgrades, or various hardening projects.
So if those were open, you wouldn't be at 93%. You'd
That's
be
correct.
less. Okay.
Correct.
So we do have some capacity.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And violent population, for those of us that aren't in your corrections world, define what a violent what is a violent prisoner? How do you classify that?
So we classify that as what they're convicted on, what they come to us on. So violent offenses may be like most likely your 7 deadlies, homicide, aggravated assault, the child molestation, sexual assault cases, all rape, all your violent crimes against persons.
So drug dealing or things like that, they're not considered violent.
No,
okay.
sir.
So your prison population over the last 10 years has probably changed. I mean, I'm trying to get some background.
So since criminal justice reform, it did just that. It took out the non-violent offenders most of the non-violent offenders out of the system. And we got stuck with the most violent offenders coming into our system. And so since then, we have about 14% increase in violent offenders since criminal justice reform took effect about 2013. That population is continuing to increase.
Representative Wiedauer.
Just to kind of expand on what he was asking, the number of beds. So just doing some quick math, if you have about 50,000 in the population now, and you have 25 that are offline, that's really only about another 5%. Or do you know what the total capacity is on and offline?
So a total, I can get the exact number. Let me pull up my, let me get the exact number of how many beds we have offline, and I'll be able to give you the exact total. Hang on one second.
If that's something that's going to take him, and I think we can get to it. I just want to make sure that we understand percentages. If we're looking at 93.7% right now, if those 2,500, if that's only going to free up 4%, I'm just kind of curious what that would be. Third mic here.
All right, those beds came back along. We're sitting at 57,252 total beds in our system. And also sometimes what we consider surge beds that we have at our availability if we have to turn them on in order to expand capacity should we push past that 57,000 mark. So that's where you get some of those numbers.
Kind of almost temporary situation.
Correct.
Yep.
So we would see this.
So it's 2,688 total vacant.
2,688,
Yes, sir.
26,088,
No, 2,600.
2,600
Yes, sir.
offline. Thank you.
Yes.
So what we did, we just changed so the world can see your slides and not necessarily us. So that's what we just changed. Are we good? All right. You might have got any questions? Okay. It's not working.
Test. Oh, it's on. Hey, because you don't hear as much of our privates. It is my understanding or I guess, do they get a quote better inmate or is the percentages down the same?
Yeah, so typically what we send to our privates and our county camps are traditionally what we call nonviolent offenders. What we mean by nonviolent offenders that go to them, they may have violent offenses. So let me just back up a little bit. When you talk about violent offenses, so we talk about that 74%. That's what they're convicted of. Now that's not taking into account their propensity of violence within the system. And so when we send the to the private prisons, you may have someone who's convicted of a violent offense, but their institutional behavior is not of violent nature. So we classify them as a medium security offender. And so that's the type of inmates that they get. And they also have receive inmates who are less likely to have chronic illness.
So their percent is 0.
As far as violent offender,
Yeah,
no, they still have violent offenders, but the
right. But
institutional.
if you take institutional behavior and all that, it's close to 0.
I would say, I wouldn't say close to 0. I would say it's probably it's lower, but it's not at 75%.
Right.
Would you say 25, 50?
I would probably say about 30,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
Representative Williams.
Commissioner, what is your average, we're looking at 57,252 total. What's your average prisoner count per cell?
It depends on each prison. So
What is your worst case scenario and your best?
we're not overcrowded. We don't have anybody sleeping on boats or on the floor or anything like that. Every offender has a bed. So if you want to take into account, some dorms hold 96, some dorms hold 50, some dorms hold 100. So it all depends on the type of on which prison that you're actually speaking towards. And most of them, and it's also a good point to know that some of the prisons, especially our big mediums and what we call medium security prisons and our close security prison, they're all double bunked. Some are triple bunked, some are open bay, open dormitory. So that you got to take that into account when you're talking about like how many prisoners can fit in one cell or one dormitory. We do have several prisons where there's 3 bunks in one cell, and that's become, over the years, when you're talking about the violent population, that's becoming a challenge for us just because it's hard to manage double bunk, let alone triple bunk inmates inside of one cell. And so we're trying to push more towards having a single cell model. We see that that's working. Prime example, we drew the population down at Smith State Prison, and the violence level on inmate violence has dropped drastically when they're in single man cells. And so you go down and you talk to the offender population, they seem safer. They said they feel a lot more safe when they're in a single man cell. When things are getting heated within the dorms, they're able to go inside their room, close the door, and get away from it. We see that it's working, but obviously we can't do that across the system. To your point, sir, that's the reason why some of those beds are offline, is because we're trying to create more single man cells as well, just to try to help drive down some of the violence that we have, just because of the inmate population that we have in the infrastructure that's creating it.
Yeah, can I follow up with that then? And if it's not readily available, just something if you could get to is, I'd just love to know the total number of cells, so we can kind of extrapolate how many are doubled up, tripled up kind of thing. How many cells currently do you have? And again, if you don't have that now, that's fine. But I'm saying if we waved a wand and all of a sudden we said, okay, one person in every cell, what's our capacity at that point? That's what I would love to know.
Okay, we can get
you know that.
that. We can get that to you. Yes, sir.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Any other questions on this is November's overview, by the way, the slide that you're looking at, November's. All right, safe, secure facilities for November. You can see the mortality report for fiscal year 24, and where we're sitting at fiscal year 25 as it relates to homicides, suicides, escapes. And we classify those as you see there from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. Absconds on transitional centers, you can see those numbers there. And let me just touch on that just a little bit too, because sometimes you may hear about absconds from transitional centers in the media, and they're classified as escapes. Well, the legal means to bring them back into our custody, we have to take an escape warrant out on them when they leave to go to work and they don't return back to the transitional center. The legal means to get them back into our custody to legally go arrest them and pick them back up. We have to classify that and take an escape warrant out by Georgia code. So you see us say it's absconds here for the legal definition that you may hear about in the media or whatever. It says escape.
So when they abscond, are they then moved from the transition center back to a facility because they have
Correct.
lost their opportunity?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
Representative,
I'm gonna give you a softball. I know the answer to this. In the last 50 years, how many people have successfully absconded or escaped from the system?
Fine and successfully, because
That you were not able to capture them?
I've been here too, but
Can't hear you.
we have one young lady, he said, that's still in Mexico right now.
Because I thought the answer was 0, so you have one. Okay, pretty good record.
But we know where she's at. Just can't go get her.
Must be doing all right.
Yes. All right. And then you can see where the contraband levels, where you see cell phones, drugs, weapons, and throwovers, that continue to be definitely a thorn in our side when it comes to contraband cell phones, weapons, throwovers. You can see the physical arrest that we made there as it relates to that. More so civilians and offenders than staff as it relates to this arrest, mostly with contraband. And, let me just say this, contraband inside of not only Georgia, but across the nation with correctional institutions is becoming a chronic problem. It's cell phones, in my opinion, is considered a deadly weapon. I think the Federal Bureau of Prisons could say the same thing for them, as well as the rest of my counterparts across the country. Not only are we facing with cell phones, we're also with drones are a big issue inside of Georgia Department of Corrections and corrections nationwide. Sit on national boards and talk to my counterparts across the country, and they're just amazed and blown away about the amount of contraband that's coming in, orchestrated on contraband cell phones and either drone or throwovers. We've made a lot of headway as it relates to technology, thanks to this body and the Senate body, and also the governor and OPB for supporting those efforts in technology to intercept contraband and also detect cell phones. However, with the population that we have and that we're dealing with, they're becoming more and more sophisticated. So you have to stay on top of that technology almost daily to make sure that we stay on top and keep this contraband out. It's a constant fight, and I just want to publicly thank our local partners, sheriff's office, police departments, who help us in this fight each and every day. Because without them, we would have a lot more contraband inside of our facilities for sure. Also, we're doing a lot of things outside the box I probably can't really talk about publicly as it relates to investigations on contraband coming into the prison system. One in particular I can't speak about. It was publicly about back in March of this year, Operation Skyhawk, which was the operation that we took down where the drone pilots were flying drones into the state prisons, and we actually took down that criminal organization. That investigation today is still ongoing, but we're finding out that it's expanded. This is a organized criminal organization that we see that's coming into not only our department, but across multiple states. We've tied that investigation into about 6 other states and about 3 dozen different prison systems in those states. So it's definitely an issue, definitely something that we're tackling head on. Actually, I think we're actually leading the nation when it comes to complex investigations as it relates to these criminal organizations, because it's just not, you're going to take out the inmate that has a cell phone and a person flying in the drone. I mean, these are sophisticated organizations that are actually orchestrated from jail, from a contraband cell phone, but then also orchestrating from outside the country as well, with bringing in illegal drugs from different countries.
I'd like to discuss cell phones a little bit.
Yes, sir.
I know that is a huge issue with everybody. And are the rules about jamming or blocking cell phones, let me back up. I know that you and some of your colleagues across the country have been lobbying the federal government to help you with being able to control the cell phones in your prisons. But are the rules the same for federal penitentiary, I can't say the word, as they are for our prisons?
Yes and no. So the federal, I think what you're speaking of, I think it was 4 or 5 Federal Bureau of Prisons. They received a waiver so they can pilot jamming technology inside of their prisons. Myself, along with all of my other counterparts across the country, have lobbied for the federal government to allow the states to do the exact same thing. What we have right now, we call managed access technology, which is not jamming. I think they're test piloting a site here in Atlanta Penitentiary, Federal Penitentiary. But we have yet to make any headway with the people in DC to allow the states to actually pilot that technology as well inside.
Did they
state
give you a
prisons.
reason as to why?
No, they didn't. I know they have a big lobby push up there with different businesses and corporations. That's the reason why they don't allow jamming. Initially, they said that they were afraid of bleed over. When you talk about bleed over, meaning that if we put this technology inside of our prisons, the bleed over signal will affect surrounding areas and may potential hinder 911 calls in that area or emergency calls. But most of our prisons are in rural areas in the middle of nowhere. And I think we made that argument to let us try it in an area where you don't have to worry about that. But we haven't made any headway on that. Not only Georgia, but anyone else in the
So
state.
who within the federal government is giving you that permission or not giving you that permission?
It's FCC. It's the commission on FCC.
Seems like if it's good enough for theirs, we ought to be able to do the same, because we're all protecting our other citizens from them. So
Yes.
anybody else have a comment? Yes, sir.
But I thought we were in Beaufort, out in Gwinnett. We did have that capability and it was pretty effective.
Yeah,
Not
it's
true?
not jamming. It's called what we call managed
Right,
access.
managed access. Aren't we doing that there?
Yes, so we are doing that there. The problem with some of the technology that we implement in some of this aging infrastructure, you're gonna hear me talk about aging infrastructure a lot, is that we can't keep it safe per se from the population. So once we go in and we can disguise it however you want to disguise it. If you have a cell phone today, you go inside of a prison, your cell phone works. We go in and start changing out light bulbs, the cell phone doesn't work anymore. The inmates are going to figure out that light bulb was changed yesterday, now my cell phone doesn't work. And they're gonna tear up the light bulb. Same thing that's going on at Phillips. We have that technology that we put in to aging infrastructure. We've come up with creative ways to try to protect it with razor wire, welding things shut, and they still find a way to get to it and disable it. And then we go back and we fix it and we turn it off. But when it works, it works. It's just a way to keep it safe. So what we're trying to do now is come up with solutions to have outside the wire or wireless managed access systems to where we don't have to integrate that into our aging infrastructure.
So when it's working, do you have less problems at Phillips than other prisons?
When as it relates to cell phone, you're still gonna have drone flyovers, or not drone throwovers, and sometimes drone. But the problem sometimes, I mean, like I said, they get sophisticated. So it's managed access. So it's capturing the cellular network.
Right.
What we've seen at places like Phillips or other places where we have that, where their cell signal is not getting out, they're coming in and they're flying in MiFis or mobile hotspots to bypass that. as we start to integrate technology into our system to modernize the officer experience with officer tablets and things of that nature, we put in Wi-Fi into our systems. They found a way to get into that, to get into our Wi-Fi network and hack it, and then enable Wi-Fi calling. And so we're working with some of our partners and our vendors now to help secure that network a little bit more, which has been working pretty effectively right now. But there's still that propensity of that happening with the technology that we're implementing. All right, talk about staffing a little bit, and this is kind of where we get into some of the ideas that's been that we've been talking with the governor's office and OPB on as it comes up into this next budget cycle. As you know, staffing is a nationwide challenge, not only for the Department of Corrections, but also for other industries as well. And so working with the governor's office and this body, definitely salary increases are on the table. And talking with them, I don't have any hard numbers, but I'm sure you all will be presented with that, as along with Godhouse and the Moss Group looking at that. So we're definitely looking at salary increases, not only for COs, but for the men and women who work behind the wire at Department of Corrections. As you all often hear me say, that people, not just COs, but people who work inside the prisons are working in the most dangerous communities in the state of Georgia, period, by far. And I just want to, like, this publicly again thank this body and the governor's office and Senate for the pay increases over the years, because it's helped us, and we can talk about that when we go into staff, and you can kind of see where we're at. But that's still a challenge for us nationwide. Salary comparison, where we sit compared to other states, you can see there our border states. And I'll kind of leave this slide up so we can kind of talk through it, and where you see where Georgia ranks behind Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee. North Carolina just got a little bit of a pay raise in talking to the commissioner up there. But so I'm not sure where they're sitting. And Godhouse and Moss Group is doing another comprehensive study on salaries for the southern states that I have yet to get the final copy on. So once they share that, we'll have that for this body too. And you can kind of see where we sit, as it relates to Georgia public safety agencies for the state. So I'll pause there, because I know I'm talking really fast, and see if you all have any questions as it relates to that. But I think we can come up with creative ways when it comes to retention. We really don't have a problem with recruitment and receiving applications. It's that retention piece. We lose most of our applicants within the first 2 years, 6 months, a year, and then 2 years. We keep them past 2 years, it drastically drops. The terminations, what we call terminations or voluntary resignations, drastically drops. But the applications, we don't have a problem getting applicants. The problem occurs in the application process. Either 80% of them don't make it through, whether it's they don't show up for the interview, background checks get them, or they have a poor interview. And so we're very selective. We're just not just going to hire anybody to come in. And so we do a comprehensive background check, but the majority of people just don't show up for the interview. And the second reason why we can't hire them is because they can't pass a background check. And then the third highest reason is the poor interview, if they make it past those first two. So I'll pause there to see if you have any questions as it relates to that.
I noticed that a couple of states have a bonus, like after 18 months or 2 years. Have you checked to see the success there, and have you considered that? Where are we there?
So we're kind of similar, doing the same thing. So when you come in as a recruit or cadet, you're coming in as a CO1. Within the first 6 months or upon completion of BCOT, which are basic academy, you get a step increase. And then if you remember, we had to a CO2. When you complete basic, you become a CO2 after that first year. So you get 6 months, 1 year, and then, as this body remembers, we have a CO3, correctional officer 3 position. After that additional year, you're eligible to receive that step increase for a correctional officer 3. So we have that built in already. It's 10% increase each time.
Okay.
So it's a 5% increase for 6 months, another 5 after that year, and then CO3 would be a 10% increase. But to answer your question too, the bonus that they're receiving, everyone is still struggling post-COVID. I think when you look at the job market and the labor market post-COVID and the industry that we work in, it's a lot difficult to attract and retain those individuals at the salaries that we're paying them to come in and do this job, where there's a lot of remote work that pays a lot more. You're not working in the difficulties and difficult environment. You're not disconnected from the world. Everybody is connected to these cell phones. They're caretakers, parents, what have you, and they give that up when they walk through the gates to work inside of the prison. So we're competing with a lot of different external factors as it relates to retaining or recruiting people to come to work inside
Quick follow-up,
corrections.
Mr. Chairman. In relation to COVID, what was your turnover rate pre-COVID and what compared to now? Since you said COVID, I know it had a big impact on the workforce, but I want to know, what was the turnover rate before COVID?
Turnover is 26% before COVID. And so if you look at, I think we got some slides in here too, and we get to it, you can flip to it, and I can show it on the screen as well. And kind of see where there it is. You can kind of see where we were fiscal year for COs and then other security. So for the department, we're at 41% in FY 2022. And then now you're seeing we're projected at 37% for the CO vacancies. You can see in that box right below that, FY 2022, we're at 47 and projected to be at 30%. So we're trending in the right direction as it relates to turnover. I think a lot has to do with the recent pay raises that we've gotten over the years. We're continuing to work on our workplace culture within the Department of Corrections, making sure that we're treating our employees right, making sure that they know they have opportunities to grow within the agency, and just mainly focus on training and that employee experience. As you remember, that one of the top priorities is employee development, employee wellness. I think that's what's really going to keep our employees here long term. If we, along with pay, you still have to work on getting our pay and benefits up to where they need to be. But you can kind of see where we lose most of our employees right there within the less than 1 year, 2 years, and then you see it just drastically drops from there.
So, Commissioner, looking at this, looks like you, with your turnover, I guess October is an example you put here, about a third of your staff or COs that you're having to actually fire them. Like a third of the COs that are leaving, you're actually having to let them go.
No, so the termination term is just they're leaving. It's whether it's voluntary termination or involuntary resignation. So it's not, termination is not that I'm firing them or letting them go.
Okay, well, involuntary separation means you're
Correct.
letting them go.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay. So what are some examples of why they're leaving, not that they're leaving voluntarily? What, you're losing a lot in the first 2 years, and just, I mean, you may not be able to tell us a lot, but just what's some examples of why they're leaving?
Anecdotally, they're saying that the job's not for them. It's difficult. Again, we're working with a very difficult population. They're finding better jobs, better pay, more flexibility. Again, post-COVID, there's a lot of other jobs that are hiring out there, and then quite frankly, everybody's hiring. And so you can make more money, less stress, not dealing with what we have to deal with behind the wire in other industries, and the flexibility is there as well.
What's a shift in corrections?
12-hour shifts. So I usually work 6 to 6, 7 to 7. We have flex shifts as well, but it's a 12-hour shift.
You work Monday 6 to 6 or 7 to 7. When do you work again?
So typically if you work Monday, Tuesday, you're off Wednesday, Thursday, work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you're off Monday, Tuesday, work Wednesday, Thursday, off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you have every other weekend off
Quick question.
when we're fully staffed.
This is interesting. Development Authority in Liberty County, and
Speak in your mic. Okay.
I'm chair.
It was.
Okay, here we go. I'm chairman of the Development Authority in Liberty County, and we have a major employer that has almost the identical work shift. And when they switched from it, accidents plummeted, performance skyrocketed. We used to have a saying in the productivity business, in another life when I made a living, I was a productivity consultant. Two people standing together said, these 40 hours are tough. He said, man, it's not the 40 hours. Just work on the 41, it gets easy. But I'm just wondering about that kind of spread in a system where it's so stressful and tough. 12 on, you look forward to those days off, but it's a long ways to a day off when you're working like that.
It is. We found that most of the staff, they like the 12-hour shifts. Essentially, they work 6 months out of the year. They are able to have every other weekend off. We looked at other models and we surveyed the staff, and you're talking about how they enjoy the weekends off. Well, if you work a 8-hour shift, you may have a weekend off every 6 weeks. So they enjoy that. But what we've done to alleviate some of that stressful environment, like we've talked about, we created our peer support team. We go in and we support them with any kind of critical incident that they may endure or encounter. We put support around them. We ensure that we support them with additional staffing, staff that can come in and relieve them on time when we can, to make sure they have that time off. Most staff get the time off that they need. We're not on any type of mandatory overtime or anything like that unless we have a critical incident that happens. We try to manage our staff accordingly so they have that work-life balance there.
Just quickly, would you be amenable to taking a deep dive, not now, on that 12-hour day? Yes, the response will always be, I love the weekends off, but my question is the performance while on.
Yes, sir.
That's that 12 hours gets old in a hurry. Trust
Yes,
me,
sir.
from a performance standpoint.
Yes, sir.
So Commissioner, give me kind of an example, or just tell me what you are actually doing for recruitment. It looks, this slide, you're having pretty good success at hiring people, but you're losing about the same number of people you're hiring. So what are you doing as far as recruitment?
I mean, I like to say we're doing everything except going door to door. We've participated so far in over 2,000 job fairs. We're working with the Chanley Group, which is a consulting group that we've hired to target our hardest to fill areas with advertisements, newspaper, social media, email blast. You may see some of our commercials when you're watching some of the sporting events, the Georgia game, Braves, Falcons. Can't believe I said that, but we have high visibility. So I think that it's reflective on the applicants that we're getting, the applications that we're getting. Where we lose people again, I think it's the environment in which we work in. It's hard to put into words, people who haven't done this work, what it's like working inside of a prison. And I can speak to that as being a commissioner. I started off at a county jail, and I can tell you this: working in the county jail from working in the prison is completely different. I worked every aspect of law enforcement, from being on the road, undercover, narcotics, you name it. I've pretty much done it. This is by far the toughest mission in public safety, period. And I think it's hard to for people to grasp that when they're actually going in. And even if there's, let's say, 20 to 30 people on the shift, I mean, you're on a compound or on a prison grounds with on average 1,600 violent offenders, especially in our close security prisons. What we're doing really good at, and you can see, once we get that staffing level up, and I'm going to use the special management unit as an example, we get that staffing level up, people tend to stay. Right? They tend to feel a lot safer. So when I first became commissioner, I think the special management unit had somewhere about 50 to 60 vacancies. Within 8 months or so, they filled all those vacancies. I gave them an additional 20 positions. I pulled from our vacancies, gave them 20, they filled those. And once they filled, I gave them another 20. Right now, they're sitting at, out of the extra 40 positions I gave them, they're sitting at, I think, like 11 or 12 vacancies today. Dooley State Prison, We have 15 vacancies. Lee State Prison, we're fully staffed there today. Maybe have maybe 1 or 2 vacancies. Rutledge is doing good. Where we struggle and where we see where we have high vacancies in some of our prisons are our level 5 prisons, our close security prisons. That's a hard population to manage in some tough areas to recruit from, but they're also dealing with the worst of the worst at Georgia that we have in our system. And so that's where you see most of our highest vacancy rates is at most of our level 5 prisons.
So if I apply with you and I want to come to work with you, how long does it take for you to hire me?
Well, it all depends, but we can get you in the door within 45 days. And that's dependent on whether or not how extensive the background checks may be. If we request more information from you, if you get all your documentation in and you successfully pass the interview and we start conducting your background check, the background check is what takes some time to get through.
So what would you say your backlog on applications is right now?
I have to check the number. I don't think we really have a backlog. We try to get them through pretty quickly. But my direction to the OPS staff is to take your time on the background checks, social media checks, reference checks, and do your due diligence on that. It's easy to get them in, come through a interview process, do fingerprints, driver's checks, GCIC check, make sure they're not wanted, don't have any felonies. They also have to go through a post background check. They have to get a post approval through post. That happens after they initially get hired. But my direction is to make sure that we take our time on that background check to make sure the people that we bringing in at the time, we vet them and there was nothing there.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Lisa.
Commissioner, when you're looking at those background checks, what types of things on the background check would preclude someone from employment off the top? All felonies?
Yeah, all felonies,
What
post
type
won't.
of misdemeanors?
Yeah, some misdemeanors that depending on the nature of the misdemeanor may disqualify them. We usually try to stick to the post regulations because if they can't get a post number, I can't hire them anyway. Definitely if they're gang involvement, that's where our social media checks come in at. That's where we check the associations that they have. We also check internally to make sure they're not affiliated with several of any offenders. Now we get that some people may apply to have family members or something like that inside the prison system, but we want to make sure it's not any kind of gang ties to that because they're trying to infiltrate through the staff trying to get hired there. Of course, drug tests. Some of the applicants fail drug tests. If you come in and you test positive for marijuana or any other reason, that excludes you from the process. So that's some of the main reasons why they don't get hired. All right. We kind of skipped ahead, so make sure I didn't go back on anything. And you're talking about hiring. We kind of touched on that slide, but you can kind of see where our applicants, before we move on to the next section, you kind of see where our applicants versus hires go on that chart there. Again, majority of them, they can't pass the background or they don't show up for the interview or they have a poor performance. So that's where we're sitting at for just COs from May to October. So we're seeing our numbers go up. I think we're sitting about, since for the last 2 years, we're about 813 more security positions filled than we were 2 years ago. So we're trending in the right direction. But it's going to take a while to get out of that hole. And as you can see right there, those are the total correctional officer hires since 2008. And you kind of see how it kind of goes up and down right there. But we're hiring more officers now than we were in like 2010, even though I know we were in a hiring freeze. But even at the height of where we were in 2013, 14, we're sitting about like 2,200 COs hired for the year. I think we reached 1,600, I think, this past October or last year. So we're not too far off from the peak of where we were And then you see our terminations. What we mean by terminations, voluntary, involuntary terminations since '08. You can kind of see a correlation when I talk about COVID, how COVID affected our workforce. You see how it drastically dropped during those COVID years, and that's a huge hill ditch to get out of, and such a and the times we are, but we're trending in the right direction. I know you see that number kind of still going down right there in 2024. That's not taking into account the November's numbers, but we do typically see a slowdown around the holidays on people coming into the workforce, especially at corrections. But this chart right here just kind of shows you, illustrates the number of people that we lost during COVID. Any questions on that? All right, moving on to the next bucket, and we're going to probably definitely in the recommendations from the governor's office, who talk about healthcare and how this is affecting. As you remember earlier, we're talking about our aging population. Our average age that we have coming into the workforce, into the prison system as offenders, our average age is about 40. They're coming in with longer sentences. We're catching the more chronic illnesses on the front end at diagnostics. Some of the offenders, the first time they've probably seen a physician in many, many, many years is when they hit diagnostic. And so we're seeing a lot more chronic illnesses coming in through Jackson than we've had in recent years. And so that's kind of driving up healthcare costs. Also, our infrastructure, lack of infirmary beds, skilled nursing beds, long-term acute care beds, and accommodated living spaces. We're having to get creative on how we house those individuals, whether we have to house them outside the wire or keep them at the hospitals, and that's costing the state a lot of money too. So part of the plan to get those individuals back inside the wire is what we're having our modular units, which we went and looked at. I think that's going to help us out tremendously, and then also leverage some of the private beds, expanding the private beds to help out with that living space, so we're not usually putting that cost into the hospitals. And then our mental health population has also increased 14% over the last few years, and so that population is hard to manage, which is also increasing the healthcare costs, and then the market increase across the country as it relates to healthcare is going up. So you're probably going to most likely see some recommendations come out as far as a increase in healthcare, and that's mainly due to these 4 things that I've listed here. Mainly just the infrastructure needs to get those infirmary beds up and expanding beds either for modular units and or utilizing private prison beds.
So can you just elaborate for the committee, when somebody gets injured or someone has to go to the hospital, just the process, coverage, everything that's needed when that occurs?
Yeah, and I might let Assistant Commissioner Holt kind of speak on that, but it's very labor intensive. So first, and Randy's not here, but I'll let him speak on the security piece of it. When we have an injury inside of the wire, of course, they go to medical, bring the medical. We try to use telemedicine as much as possible. So we don't have a doctor or a nurse there. We'll call in telemedicine. They'll evaluate the inmate and make the determination whether or not to go to the hospital or not. If that determination is made, it takes 2 officers per inmate to go out to the hospital. And I can let you speak on what all that entails.
And one of those officers is armed at that time. If that inmate is life flighted to a location, if that inmate is, one of those officers is armed of the 2 that have to go. And that's if it's at our standard facilities. If it's at our SMU, it could be up to 5 officers depending on the offender that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Special management
Our
unit.
special management unit,
That still doesn't explain what a SMU is.
Tell them who we have up there.
our special management unit is where we house our most dangerous offenders who've committed homicides inside of our system. They've committed homicides against staff. They've come into our system with pretty egregious offenses, and we have about 160 plus inmates that are there right now that fit that criteria. Some of those offenders are designated to have at least at minimum 4. Some of them 5 officers on escort when we're taking them to certain places. In our standard facilities and our close security facilities, it's on average 2 officers going with them. And once they get to that hospital, they're required to maintain that post so long as that offender is at that hospital.
So, and when you talk about even take, for example, I'm gonna talk about two, the special management unit, offender transport. Some of those, like Assistant Commissioner Holt spoke about, is just 4 to 5 people escort, period. When they go outside the wire, we have to put additional support with them, whether it's special agents, K9. So we may have up to 10 people going with one person to the hospital just because of the nature of which they are, their crime that they committed and how dangerous they are. People don't really think about that when you talk about from a staffing level. Take special management unit out of it, you take any other prison within the system, it's a minimum of 2. And so you think about that impacts staffing on a local level, from a facility level. When you show up to work, you have 10 people on shift, 2 have to go out, you're left with 8, somebody else has to go out, you're left with 6. I mean, it kind of dwindles down our workforce. And so that's a chronic issue. Right now, we're probably averaging somewhere around 60, 70 people in the hospital per day, whether it's long-term acute care and or just going out for behavior or hospital stays, I should say. That's not taking into account any type of emergency situations or medical runs that we have to do.
And also, the public may not know, and you stated it, that one of those guards or officers that goes out with the prisoner is armed.
Correct.
Your officers inside the wire are not armed, correct?
They are not armed inside the facility whatsoever with anything but less than lethal munitions. And most of them only have their radio and a lot of good common sense. And they rely on one another for that. We do have facilities where they have other less lethals, tasers, pepper spray and things of that nature. But some of our minimum medium security facilities only have the radio.
And you talk about staffing, you talk about retention, that could be pretty intimidating as well. You're talking about going into a dormitory or going inside of the prison. Let's take a dormitory, for example. You asked about beds earlier, 96, to 100 to 60 to 50, depending on, with nothing but a set of keys and a radio, maybe. And so we're working on trying to outfit and put in some more less lethal options for our staff inside the wire, because of, as you can see, so most of the inmates, they have homemade weapons that they're making out of the aging infrastructure. And so we want to make sure that officers are equipped to handle any situation that may arise in there. So the times of changing as it relates to corrections, and we've got to thinking outside the box, but we need the support of this body as well for funding to help with implementing some of those less lethal options.
Representative Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, before we move on from this healthcare slide, I'm wondering if point 3, if you could just talk a little bit about mental health. What are some of the issues that you see are most prevalent amongst the population? And are those identified at diagnostic, or are they how many are developing over time while they're in the population? Just address that, if you would, please.
And I can let Assistant Commissioner Holt, because it's probably most likely they're coming in off diagnostic.
So when they come in from diagnostics, initial cursory check is done with them, and many of them have either come in with a diagnosis or are diagnosed at diagnostics with the mental health. However, when they get to their permanent facility and are assigned, if it presents at that facility, all inmates are required to go through at minimum a 90-day review. And during that course of that 90-day review, or if there's any incident that presents itself, they may or may not be put on a mental health caseload. If they're put on a mental health caseload, then that, of course, increases their visits with a clinician and a mental health provider monthly, if not more than that. So it's ongoing. It's not a static thing. They have multiple opportunities throughout the course of the year to have assessments, and that's every inmate at a facility. And then more importantly, we make sure over the last few years that we increase our mental health opportunities at every one of our facilities, and not just a couple of our facilities. So each facility has opportunity to make that assessment.
And just to kind of put into perspective, when we talk about the increase for the mental health, about 27% of our total population on a mental health caseload.
27%?
Correct. It's actually 26.65.
That's it.
Safety, security, technology, infrastructure. Again, we talked about the violent population and utilize technology. So let me just kind of touch on that, because we pretty much touched on all these bullet points as it relates to during the course of our conversation. But safety, security, infrastructure obviously is top priority of the agency to making sure that we keep not only our staff safe but the offenders safe as well. And so of course we put in a lot of technology in to help with that effort. A lot of outside the box thinking of trying to utilize ways to supplement the workforce shortage with AI cameras. I want to talk about our Overwatch unit. We're trying to stand up what we call a real-time crime center for corrections, as to put extra eyes and ears out there in the field as it relates to that, which is going to pay huge dividends for us. We believe we've kind of stood some of that up quasi right now with some of the technology that we have in place, and we've seen it work. It's been working, but to stand up a real-time crime center within the agency is definitely top priority for us and for me, just because it's going to actually put extra eyes and ears out there. Trying to be careful again about tipping our hand to some of the technology that we do have as it relates to what's coming down the pike and what we have already implemented as it relates, just to kind of keep it protected as far as so it doesn't get compromised by the offenders. But I also will encourage this body and this body to come in and take a look at some of the technology that we have that we're utilizing that's proven to be working, and some of the stuff that we have in place coming up this budget cycle.
Anybody got a question?
And I'm going to turn over to Assistant Commissioner Sanders to talk about some of the programs and things that we're doing from an inmate services standpoint.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Jay Sanders. I'm Assistant Commissioner over Inmate Services, which is basically the programming that takes place in the facilities. Got a number of slides here, and I get to tell, you've heard a lot of challenges, and we have challenges in our area as well, but I get to tell some of the good stories of things that are happening, folks that are being released, folks that are not coming back to our custody. So I get to tell you a little bit about that. On this slide, you see, this is our dashboard slide. We look at this slide every month in our Board of Corrections meeting and at other times during the month. And just kind of has a running month to month and some yearly averages on our programming. Our behavioral health programs, our cognitive programs that we deliver to help change the way somebody thinks about their actions. These are some of the enrollments and completions you see there. On the top left corner, the blue being enrollments, red being completions. You see last fiscal year, this current year, fiscal year to date. We continue to push those programs very heavily to get folks enrolled and like I said, change the way they think and the way they act, not only while they're in our facilities, but ultimately when they're released. Next part of that slide is our RSAT beds. We have a little over 2,100 RSAT beds, and that's a residential substance abuse treatment center. That's a 9-month program. Some of them are probation and parole beds that come to us on revocation. Some of those are inmate beds as well, but that's a program that are housed within our facilities to help those who are truly battling substance use addictions and try to get them back on the right track. In the center there, you see our services that are held.
Commissioner, so would it be a safe assumption to say that you've got 4,300, well, no, right now, 2,500 that are hooked right now and or does not everybody come through this program?
No, sir, not everybody comes through this program. This is probably I would call it our top tier substance abuse program. It's the longest one we have. So not everybody actually comes through this program. This is kind of reserved for those who have the worst problems. and we try to address those.
What would you think is the percentage of those that do come in that are on something and probably really do need to be in an RSAT program?
Sir, I've seen numbers 70, 80% have some, at some point in time, some sort of substance abuse issue, be it alcohol or drugs. But having been a probation officer for a number of years, most folks have struggled with some sort of addiction.
Thank you.
In the center there, you see some of our services, and these are different types of religious services that are offered within our facilities and the numbers of folks that have attended them. Just below that, you see our active volunteers. We could not do what we do without our active volunteers. We appreciate those folks coming in and helping us every month. And sometimes you think of volunteers as a religious aspect. While that is a large portion of our volunteers, we also have folks that come in and do literacy, help us with GEDs, financial planning, those types of things. So volunteers, and I've got a few other slides further down that I'll hit the volunteers. GEDs, and here again, this is for this fiscal year. That number is a little old. We now have 422 GEDs. We have a standing goal of 2,000 GEDs per year in our facility. We're pushing hard to get there, and that's a tough sell sometimes to get somebody to want to be involved in the GED program, but we've got a lot of good staff working really hard to help educate those in our population. Transitional services down in the bottom left corner. We work very hard to try to give at least one document, if not multiple documents, to individuals who are releasing so that they can be on their feet, such as a birth certificate, social security card, driver's license or ID. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about those partnerships in a couple of slides. But we work really hard to put something in their hand to help them reestablish themselves when they hit the streets. And then lastly, bottom right is our career, technical, and higher education completions. This is our vocational side of the house as well as post-secondary. And like I said, I've got another slide that breaks those numbers down a little bit further. On the next slide, these are our recidivism rates, and all this information I'm going to show you on the next few slides is in our impact report. That report is currently being printed. That came about as criminal justice reform as a byproduct of that. And we are mandated to deliver that every year to the legislature, the governor's office, et cetera. So it is being printed right now. And Rob Thrower will get y'all a hard copy of that as well as a digital copy if you would like it in the coming weeks. These show our reconviction rates. And what I want to show here is the benefit of programming. You see in that round circle our general recidivism rates. These are for people who released in 2021 is a little over 26%. If you look on that left-hand side, you'll see those that released having completed some sort of educational program, vocational program, or cognitive program is lower than the average general population recidivism rate. So we know that programming works. The one exception to that, and typically by year, is the RSAT population. These folks have struggled, many of them, their entire life with addictions. So they are a population that we continue to work with, but a lot of times their recidivism rate is a little bit higher just because of their addiction issues. But we continue to work with them, and some people will actually go through RSAT multiple times trying to get help for themselves.
So are our vocational programs, are those all coordinated through our technical colleges, or you have most of yours actually just working with you? How do we?
We've got a few vocational instructors that are GDC employees, but most of that is contracted with our various tech school partners across the state.
Colonel Hitchens?
Well, this RSAT program is kind of interesting to me, and this is the longest, 9 months is the longest program I've ever heard of, and very obviously you have them in a residential environment where they can't fail. And having been a probation officer, when they go on parole, do you follow them into parole and develop any type of statistical data on how effective it is?
We have not studied that recently. I think it has been done in the past. There typically is some aftercare. So if a probation or parolee comes to us and they go through the RSAT program, when they go back to community supervision under the Department of Community Supervision, they get a more intensive aftercare program because they are stepping down out of, like you said, a residential environment where they have been. Many of them, they were in the program for 9 months, but they're probably in jail prior to that. So they've they've been off the streets for a while, so they need some very close attention to help them succeed.
And that's my question is, how effective it is. I mean, I've never heard of any other program, and of course, this is a different population from civil society, but, you know, most of them are 30 days, 6 weeks, and I'm not so sure that the positive reinforcement they get out of that, leads them on the straight line forever. And I know these guys are probably harder involved because it's been their lifestyle for a long time. But
Yeah.
I think that'd be an interesting statistic to keep track of. And
Yes, sir. We'll take a look at that and I can get that for you.
I think maybe some people in the outside world, because that's 9 months without it is a long time. I mean, it looks like the cure rate ought to be statistically much higher, even though it is a different population.
Yes, sir. It's a tough population, a very tough
Oh, yeah.
population.
Yeah.
Any other questions about recidivism? Next slide. This is a quick snapshot of some of our career technical and higher education. Last year, we had over 45,000 completions. Those are broken up into 4 categories. On the job training, which basically anything that happens in a prison environment has an inmate has a job, whether it's a dorm orderly, kitchen aide, laundry, outside grass detail, et cetera. So that's what's comprised of that group. Post-secondary, we actually offer college classes, and these are 2,900 completions of individual classes that were offered through a lot of our post-secondary partners, and I'll talk about those down at the bottom of the screen. Skills training, these are shorter trainings. Many of these are offered through our tech school partners, and then our actual vocational certificates like welding, construction, HVAC, plumbing, those types of things. So all of that goes together to make up our CTHE numbers. We do have a great partnership with the tech schools. Our Commissioner Dozier and all of his associated schools are great partners with us. Many of you have been in our facilities. They were never built to do vocational training. They just don't have the workspace to do that. So we partner with the tech schools, and where we have space, we provide those programmings. And then we've got some innovative partnerships where we're using mobile semi-trailers that have been outfitted as classrooms. For example, we have welding, construction or framing. We have a food truck program. We have, I think it's 6 mobile trucks right now that allow us to move from facility. We take a truck and an instructor, send them to a facility, let them sit there for a couple of months, run a number of people through those classes. Then we can pick them up and move them to another facility and get that programming to another facility within the system. So that's an extremely good partnership we've had with the tech schools. In the middle of the page there, you also see some soft skill classes that are offered. These are offered via Chromebook. They're a self-paced class that the inmates can sit down and take, and they're through our tech school partners, but they are on a Chromebook, which is, by the way, is locked down, so they can only access certain areas and places that we want to allow them to access, but those are soft skill classes. Then we actually have another partnership with the tech schools to deliver OSHA and ServSafe and forklift training. These are some classes we can run in relatively short time frames, but they offer great benefit when these individuals hit the street, especially if you're going into work, either in an industrial environment or potentially in a food service environment, to walk in and they get the certificate in hand, so they can walk in with that certificate and say, hey, here's what I did while I was in prison. Questions?
Representative Holcomb is behind y'all. He's on the committee. He has his light. Do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a tough sell to get people to enroll in the GED program.
A lot of them just,
Yes.
you're in prison and you want to be a tough guy, and I don't want to go down to education. I want to hang out in a dorm. And so sometimes it's a tough sell to get them to buy into, hey, this will help you improve your circumstances when you hit the streets.
Okay.
But like I said, we work hard at that, not only from a teaching aspect, but even from a security aspect. The officers, try to get them involved in program. We know that any inmate we can get involved in any of this type of programming that we're talking about today will be a better managed inmate. They present less problems. They're active. Their mind's engaged.
And that's my follow-up question. In terms of what we hear is that we have a more violent population, and then looking at the different interventions and programs to help reduce that or mitigate that violence, have you tracked or examined the extent to which these different programs reduce violence within the specific facilities themselves?
I do not have that number. We can run that, but I can tell you the facilities where we're able to consistently run programming, keep large parts of the population engaged are better managed facilities. They have a purpose. They get up every day with a purpose. I'm going to class, be it a GED or a vocational class, or even a cognitive class, but they've got a purpose and it helps drive them and motivate them. So they are better managed facilities.
So what are the barriers to getting more people to participate so we could have better outcomes? Because it's the Department of Corrections. So the idea is that the vast majority of these people are going to be released, and we want them to then be not be a recidivist and never be under the department's correction again. So what are the barriers to expanding that success overall?
Quite honestly, a lot of our facilities are kind of landlocked. And, one of the challenges that we face is the amount of space available for actual programming. So if you're trying to program a facility of 1,800 offenders, you may only be able to program within a certain period of time, 200, 250 inmates per day in certain areas, depending on what that is. So that's why we try to make sure that there's placed at different locations where we have availability of space in order to keep them moving through the system. Jay and his group monitor which inmates are actively enrolled versus those who have a need. So we track those who have need of that programming. As soon as an availability opens up, we move them into that location. But quite honestly, it is a spacing issue with some of it.
Thank you, sir. And also, just to touch on that, not only a spacing issue, but I mean, really quite honestly, also you talk about staffing issue. I don't know, Jay, you want to talk about some of the challenges that we have. Talk about challenges of getting volunteers and people to come inside the Y. We also have some of those challenges in some areas as far as getting instructors to come in to conduct these classes, as well as security staff sometimes to move inmates to these classes. But sometimes a lot of it, it's hard to find and keep instructors and or counselors. And so I think I'm going to tie that all in at the end of the presentation, but I think that's when it comes into as support from this body as it relates to appropriations, looking at funding to increase the salaries for those individuals as well, not just COs, because we do struggle in retaining our instructors to deliver these programs as well as security staff.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one last question? I think what I heard you say, and I want to make sure that I understood it correctly, is generally speaking, the prison populations are less violent within those that have programs that are sourced. Is that correct?
We can keep programs up and running, be it education, vocation, chaplaincy, cognitive programs, those facilities, like I said, fully staffed with those types of programs, the population is better managed.
I'd be curious in knowing if you could get for us a detailed analysis by facility in terms of what you have, what programs you have, how many people are served, and what the wait list is.
We can.
Thank you.
Representative, I do think that, and I think this was touched on a little bit. So the prisoners have to want to be able to go into this too, and they've got to prove that they will behave there too. So, and with the more violent, maybe that's harder. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This kind of piggybacks on what Representative Higgins was saying. I'd be very interested in knowing, you've got 80 associate degrees, 60 bachelor degrees, a much needed forklift. Jobs are out there. Do you track after what's happened to these people? I remember a period some years ago, and this was in the general population. Everybody had a certificate for something on the wall and no job to show. What happens? Do you track? You leave here with a bachelor degree. Where do they go? And what's your relationship with private industry in the placement of people that have shown that they're now qualified to do these jobs?
So many times when they leave us, it gets tough to track them. A lot of them don't want, they're done with their sentence many times, so they do not want to really have much contact with us. We do have some contact through the Department of Community Supervision, and we do have a number of industries that we work with. We work with several industries, like Manufacturing Association, et cetera, some of those types of industries, to send release lists to those industries to say, hey, in the next 6 months, these individuals are releasing to certain areas. If you're interested in what skill set they may have gained while they were with us, if you're interested in talking with these individuals, we can make that happen. If you're interested in putting them to work. And so we do have some partners out there that have worked with us on that. But it does get tough to track once they are released from facilities. Talking of these associates and bachelor's degrees, one thing I wanted to point out is the Department of Corrections does not pay for any post-secondary training or education, college degrees. We partner with other schools who do. Some of the schools that partner with us are Bruton Parker, Ashland, which is a university out of Ohio, the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We have 2 seminary programs. Georgia State and then Life University are the ones that conferred these 140 degrees last year. So, and then we have pending Pell applications for a number of other schools because Second Chance Pell has been recently reinstated. So we're going through an application process to broaden the number of schools that can offer post-secondary programming. And one of the things to Representative Holcomb's point that we're trying to do when we talk about space and the number of teachers that we have, or maybe not have in some instances, we've gone to some distance learning where we record teachers, our good teachers, teaching a strong subject that they're very good in, math, social service, whatever, social sciences. We record those, and then those can be delivered to the population at a later date. And so we're trying to do some distance learning. We're able to get some federal funds to do some grants just to get the equipment to use that so that we can record and house and have a catalog of teachers teaching certain subjects and use that maybe in some instances where we do have some teacher shortages. Next slide I want to talk about real quick is our vital records. We've got some great partnerships with Department of Driver Services as well as Vital Records. We started a partnership with DDS back in 2016. And since then, we've had over 43,000 driver's license or ID cards that we've run through this process and put in somebody's hand prior to release. So if they can get a driver's license, we work with DDS to get them a driver's license. If for some reason, maybe they've never had a license and they obviously can't go do the road test, or maybe they've got a suspension on their license that they can't resolve while they're inside, they actually get a state ID card from DDS. So they're releasing with something here again to help them reestablish themselves in the community. We have a couple of staff at Vital Records that print birth certificates for inmates who are born in Georgia who are housed in our system. So we can put a birth certificate in their hand prior to release. So we're working really hard to try to give them some documents so that when they hit the streets, they've got those in their hands. The bottom of that slide's just a snapshot. We have our transitional centers. We've got about 2,800 transitional center beds across the state. These are some folks who worked really hard while they were in transitional center and applied themselves and left with these amounts of money in their pockets or in a fund so that when they hit the streets, they're able to put them, and this is nothing but good old hard fashioned work where they got up every day and went to work and worked as many hours or as many shifts as they could at whatever their location was as a transitional center resident and put this money aside. So this is real money that's going to help them get back on their feet and not come back to us. Sir?
I said, that's pretty good footwork.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And Jay, if you mind, just jump in right quick and just kind of touch back on Representative Williams' question about employment as well. If you want to touch on, also we hire, we train some of these offenders or residents up on a skill set that we see that we need, Department of Corrections actually hires them upon release. And not only do we hire them, but also the Building Authority and other state entities hire them for the skill set that we've trained them on. And so we've had several that work down in our fleet department, our maintenance department, that we actually trained as they were inmates and or residents that came back to us, and we hired them upon release to continue that work. So the state hired them. If you know,
So, Mr. Chairman, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes, sir.
Something just hit me and I haven't thought of this. So 43,000 cards, is that in the last, that's since 2016? Is that
Yes.
what that is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what percent of our residents are not U.S. citizens? Or are there any that aren't?
I would have to ask somebody about the U.S. citizen. I know several years ago when we started this partnership, we looked and 20 to 25% of our inmate population was born outside the state of Georgia. So that makes it a little tougher to get some of these documents. Because
But if we have people here that are committing crimes and then they end up in your custody that aren't supposed to be here, what's the I mean, do we prosecute them and then turn them over to the Fed? How does that work?
So we have a process during diagnostics where we have staff that are identified and work directly with ICE to actually identify who that is, track them through our system, and then they have deportation processes when they release or during the course of their sentence. That's built into our diagnostic process.
So we would continue to punish them or have them in our care, even whether they are or aren't, right?
Correct.
Okay.
There's a process also what is called international transfer, where the state can elect, and it has to go through a certain process where the state can elect to, if it's foreign national, to release them back to their country of origin. But that's a process that has to go through lots of steps to get there. Once they're done with their U.S. sentence, ICE typically pick them up and then they go back to their original.
I'm just curious
Place
as
of
to
origin.
how many are in, how many
I'm
of
getting that
that is
number.
composed of?
I'm getting that number for you.
Colonel Hitchens.
The gentleman that just left, testified in public safety about 2 years ago about it. We got some numbers from him about just exactly how many, illegal immigrants are incarcerated in the state of Georgia. And I was shocked, really at how many there are and how violent, some of them are. But the thing that really unnerved me was the fact that, many of the countries, once they get out and go through the deportation system, that the countries won't take them back. So they get released onto the street
Mhm.
because they've served their time.
Mhm. Thank you. Sorry, got off a little bit there. but
No,
good to-
sir. Good questions. And we'll get to those answers. Next slide real quick, talking about a few more programs. We've already talked about our cognitive behavioral programs. Commissioner Thompson, you see up in that top right, Commissioner Thompson with Department of Labor came to us, I don't know, probably 18 months ago and wanted to help with a program. So they have helped us develop a program, or they developed it and we've helped them implement it, Walking the Last Mile, where they're running that at our Metro Reentry facility, and they're going to expand to some other facilities. So that's a great partnership with labor, and they're putting them to work to answer some of Representative Williams' questions. They train them and help them get ready so they hit the streets and ready to work. In the middle there, another part of our RSAT program is a family reunification program. We talked about how tough that population is. A lot of times they burned every bridge they had to burn before they end up where they end up. So we're trying to reunite them with their families and mend those relationships where possible. Another neat part of the program is we're able to actually give Narcan out to these family members when these individuals are released. So if there is a relapse, they're ready to deal with it. So we're able to actually put that in their hands. And it's sad that we have to do that, but we're very glad that we are able to offer that service. We've talked already about our volunteers. We see there the number, this was for FY24. Like I said, some over 5,100 volunteers, new applications that were approved. We lost a lot of volunteers during COVID. A lot of them just decided they didn't want to come back. And I understand that. But we've been working really hard to get those numbers back up. We had 7, 8, 9,000 volunteers prior to COVID. So, but those numbers are coming back a little slow, but coming back, and we're very thankful for those volunteers and what they do. This is on our GED program. So every year we work really hard to get GEDs. We've talked about it. Last year we offered or were able to help inmates earn 1,493. That was represented 20% of every GED awarded within the state from the tech schools, because technical schools oversee that, came from within inside a GDC facility. We've had some years when it's been as high as 25, 26, 27% of every GED awarded. So they're, like I said, they're great partners with us. They work really hard, but we're proud of our GED numbers, and we're always struggling or striving to get them higher. At the bottom, you see a couple other partnerships we have. We actually have 3 charter high schools in our facilities, 160 inmates total represented there. And since inception with them in 2015, we've actually had 459 high school graduates, and they get a diploma, they get a class ring that says Foothills Charter High School. Doesn't say anything about Department of Corrections, so they leave with that in hand as well. Special ed, that's another service we offer. We work very closely with the Department of Education to identify anyone who was special ed when they were actually in the school systems. And then if they want to, we can pick up that and continue their education while they're in our facilities. One other quick slide on libraries. We work very hard to get our libraries and keep them robust. Our donations increased by almost 15% last year. We put over 38,000 books into circulation. See there in the middle, we have law library as well. So we had over 45,000 accesses to our law libraries, and those are offered many times on Chromebooks electronically, so that the inmate can go in and sit down and do the research they want to do. And then our circulation increased approximately 20% from FY23. And then we actually do interlibrary loans, both within the agency and within local libraries in the community nearby. When maybe we don't have a particular book or particular subject, we'll go find that subject or that book. And then lastly, just real quick, 3 success stories that we compiled either from our staff, or actually, believe it or not, we have folks that reach back out to us and say, hey, I've been released and I'm doing well. The top left one, you'll see there, a lady that was in our Arendelle State Prison, has been sober since early 2020, went through the RSAT program. We've talked about that a little bit, trying to get a nurse practitioner license back in place. Has been working on that. She's been in a peer monitoring program with the Georgia Board of Nursing, so she's actively pursuing getting back on track. The one on the far right there, gentleman's a minister, teaches a Bible study, motivational speaker, did a TED Talk event. Many of you are familiar with those formats. He's a mentor at a community center and works with DJJ, mentoring juvenile offenders, trying to help them out. And then lastly, this was a success story. Had a gentleman who was 61, quit school in the 4th grade. And we get a lot of that. A lot of folks, 4th to 8th grade education is pretty common. Took the math GED, and I would not want to take the math. I've heard it is the hardest part of the GED. Took the math GED without a calculator and scored very high. Then he took the actual whole GED test, finished, took only each part one time, studied every day and night, asked for extra books, and was able to get his GED program while in a transitional center. So those are the folks we feel like we're making a difference when we can help a gentleman or anybody for that matter do something they've not been able to accomplish, and they leave better than when they came to us. And they've got some skills or trades that they can use as they hit the streets. Like I said, that's a small part. We'll give y'all a full impact report in the next couple of weeks. We'll have Rob bring those to y'all. And that's all I have.
All right, and to answer your question, Mr. Hitchens, so we have a total of 1,921 offenders reported being foreign-born citizens of the United States, and we have 1,700 who have active ICE detainers on them in our system.
So, I just want to say this because I do have some other questions, but, I know that you put the safety of all our citizens first. You put the safety of your employees and you put the safety of those that are incarcerated with you. That's your job one. But it is good to see and to hear and learn what you are doing for when they are released to go back to a life of, or to start a life as a productive citizens, because many of them never have been. So I've seen in one of my tours with you to the transfer center and how you do try to get them accustomed to life later and back, outside the fence, so that it is great to see what you're doing. You tell y'all take that serious, because they do need to be, when they've proven that they want to and can, that you give them that opportunity to get to be a normal citizen of our state and our country. So back in one of the earlier slides, when you were showing the hiring and retention and all that, all the different officers, I think it's the correction officer vacancy turnover, this one right here. I noticed that you're hiring, your numbers of people you're hiring as Gen Z and millennials is obviously higher than the rest, which is, a lot of the population and those that are searching for jobs. And you're probably knocking your head trying to figure out what can we do to make them stay and make them, say this is an okay job. And I remember meeting one of your guards at one of the facilities. It was a younger female that we started discussing her job and what she did, and she had a tablet that she used. And when we started talking about that tablet, you could see her excitement grow and just, she was excited about what she could do to complete her job on that tablet. And I guess I'm saying, because of the generations, they start early on some sort of electronics. And I think that kept her involved in the job. It actually, I think, made her feel a little safer. And all that to be said, where are we with putting that technology throughout all of the prisons? Because I just wonder if that would help with maybe some of your retention.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's definitely what we're looking at when we're looking at the generations that we're hiring in. They grew up on technology. That's all they have is technology. And so the officer tablets have been a tremendous asset to our staff. And so we're currently rolling out to all of our facilities, all of our state prisons, that officer tablet. Obviously, it takes some time in some of the rural areas to have to get it implemented because of Wi-Fi or AT&T, and putting that technology into those areas, which I think we pretty much have. We have all of them installed now. As far as AT&T, now we're rolling out rolling out the officer tablets to all the state prisons. And you're right. When you go around and you talk to the officers who have those tablets, they enjoy their job. I mean, they don't have to write and log into the log book. They're able to move around the dorm, log what they're doing as they're doing it, instead of trying to manage the population inside that dorm, going back and logging it into this big docket book. And it also creates a real-time look for us back at central office or whoever, Matt and his team, to kind of see what's going on real time inside of the prison. So that's some of the technology that we're implementing that's help retaining some of our staff there. That makes us feel like they have something that they can utilize. That makes their job a lot more easier and more efficient.
Well, and also when they are on duty, they cannot have their cell phone. And
No.
I'm as guilty as probably everybody sitting up here. You don't sit in many meetings without looking at your phone, and even if somebody calls you or texts you, you're texting back. So I mean, I think I've even seen one recommendation to allow them to have them. So I know that's a whole nother big discussion, but I think that's whatever we could do in that. And I'm glad to hear that we're rolling that out statewide. So
yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of tie it back in, because I'm pretty sure they have some more questions. I think they'll really look at what this body can do, or this committee can do from an appropriation standpoint. Obviously, I haven't seen or the governor's recommendations, OPB recommendations as it relates to budget. But what I do know in conversations with them, that pay raises are on the table for everybody that works inside corrections, not just COs, but you're talking about our counselors, our instructors, everybody who works behind the wire. Pay raises are on the table, and for consideration for this body and for the General Assembly for this fiscal year or this legislative cycle. So I'd ask for your favorable support in that regard, and continue to work on what we can do to help retain our staff and attract that staff, that Gen Z, those millennials that we have there. Of course, we talked about healthcare. Healthcare is another topic that you're probably going to see come across in the recommendations that we've been in discussions about. So look for that. And then also, we just want to touch on the infrastructure need. And I know we talk about it a lot, but that is something that is dire. I think our newest prison is 35 years old at this point. So, we're constructing Washington State Prison. Once that gets up and running, we're still about 2 years out from actually opening the doors on that. We plan on coming out of the ground. We did our ground site work on that. It's ready to go. Plan on coming out of the ground with actual construction first quarter of next year. So that you're still talking about 2 years out. But the critical need for our infrastructure upgrades is dire. And how that's going to look over the course of the next couple of years. We didn't get like this overnight, and it's going to take a long time, quite frankly, to get out of it. But I think moving to a model of more single man cells is the way to go. Utilizing and how we get there to harden our existing infrastructure, how we're going to get there, support of expanding maybe the private beds in support of our modular units that we went and looked at that kind of help us with our lock and control projects. Our locks and lock and control projects are definitely needed. It's an expensive and an exhaustive process. We just can't go to Home Depot, Lowe's, or Ace and get a lock. I mean, that design and that lock and control process takes several months, if not up to 8 to 10 months to actually complete. And so we have a plan designed for that, to harden our existing facilities as we continue to upgrade the system as a whole. There's a plan in place to do that. But again, that's going to take a long time to get there, but and a lot of commitment from an appropriation standpoint to get to that point. But again, without knowing what's actually going to be in the recommendations, I think definitely the staffing increases for everybody was definitely on the table, and to look at to help retain what we have and recruit what we looking for.
Representative Williams.
Commissioner, I'm neither a contractor nor an architect, but I know you're in touch on the construction of the newest facility, and our needs are desperate. I'm just wondering how we not only opened, but started moving Hyundai electric vehicles out in a year. Massive building, huge requirements. And it takes 2 years to build a prison. Just kind of help me. I'm not a contractor, but help me with that.
And I might get some help from my chief of staff here to understand that. But I think a lot of it, the industry is tight, and we talk about contractors. So let's take, for example, our lock and control systems for locks. That industry is consolidated. So there's only maybe like 2 companies, I think, that manufactures locks. And so when you're talking about constructing a prison versus constructing a Hyundai plant, we got to make sure that outer shell of that prison is secure. There's a reason why we're going with precast blocks. So you got to design that, do the site work, and then once we design it, that's it. It can't change. You're not just putting a shell in and putting conveyor belts or machinery or technology inside there. We have to actually construct the prison to hold the type of offender that we have. And then also, again, going back on the industry, it's very small and very competitive. And we're not the only one building prisons in the United States. And so we're competing with a lot of different county jails, a lot of other prisons that are being built across the country for product and things of that nature to get done. But the design phase takes a lot. And Alan, I don't know if you want to touch on and kind of talk through that process, but we're in meetings every week. We've been in meetings every week, multiple days a week, designing and talking through the final stages of this prison build. Because once we do that design and we get that precast measure, it's no turning back on that at that point.
I understand. Commissioner, and I hear what you're saying. Believe me, I've heard that on so many state and federal projects until it's almost a rerun. My problem is this. Everything in that Hyundai plant is brand new. We never had one like it in Georgia. There are very few in the world. So lack of technology was a problem there, but boy, it happened. And what I don't understand. I understand about the need for security, but have you tried to get in one of these new plants lately? It's easy to get to CIA headquarters. So they got a little security too. I'm just having a problem. If we do the numbers, how long it will take us to build new prisons at this rate? Long time after me and a lot of others are gone, because that's 2 years is a long time to build something that there should be a template for somewhere.
And I don't know if Alan want to jump in, but I can say that now we have the template. So moving forward, it shouldn't take as long, because once we've worked very hard on the design of Washington State Prison. So now we have the template to go by. We wouldn't have to do that work anymore. That's what takes the longest. But I'll let you expand on that.
Yeah, we did spend an extensive amount of time on the design. So it's not like the design of any prison that exists today. There's some
I
similarity.
can't hardly hear you. I'm sorry. Just a
I got it
little
up. Go ahead. Keep talking. Just
Okay.
talk.
So there are some similarities to what's going on in other states, but the way we've designed it is to reduce movement and reduce the the number of employees that are needed so they can be more effective. So that's why it did take a long time to design. I can tell you just on the precast cells for Washington, it'll take 1 year for them to build every cell and get them placed. So that adds to that time frame. There's a lot of technology that's in that facility. So when the commissioner talks about the lock and control systems, there's a lot of other systems. We're doing stun fencing, things of that nature. All that takes time to be manufactured. So, but it, just as the commissioner said, once going forward, we can use that template and help speed up that process.
Yeah, this is what we call the state of the art facility. I think it's going to be in the country when it terms of prisons. Again, we designed it in the sense of, like Alan was talking about, to require less staff to manage it. We have consultants and architects on this project, and they're very impressed by that. I think it's going to be a flagship, for lack of better terms, when it comes to for prisons, for both staff and the offender experience.
Colonel Hitchens, you got any closing comments or questions?
Myself, state contracting is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Those of us who drive back and forth, I'm right in the Savannah area, and they've been working on I-75, I-16 down there for about 5 years now, and I don't see any completion in the process. And I-95, I-16 is in the same status. If you're in the private sector, you pick out who you want to do it, and they come, you enter into the contract, and they come fix it. You don't go through all the process that you have to do in the state government, so that the process is fair to everybody concerned.
Yes.
It really ain't the complexity.
Well, it's
It's
complex.
something I can't say publicly. That's what it is.
And then if somebody doesn't get the bid, they sue you, and that ties it up even longer.
Yeah, there's protests and stuff that goes on. So there's it is a process, but I think it's like you said, it's a fair process to make sure that there's no improprieties there and everybody gets a fair shake at the contract.
Chairman Weedar, any comments?
No, I'm good. I appreciate the information, and a couple pieces that we'll talk about. Specifically total number of cells. I think I'd really like to know that number when you get a chance.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Hagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank y'all for all the work you do to keep both your COs and the rest of your staff safe, but also those that are in population. I think that's really important, that to recognize that you're looking at both of those populations, and also the work that you're doing specifically with your programs to make sure where possible that we can reduce recidivism and create a good opportunity for those that are coming out of the system. And thank you for all the great information you brought to us today and for your willingness to answer all of our questions. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. There was a lot of information shared. I would like to say that I think every member of this committee is really interested in being a help to improve, because it might come as a surprise to you, but you got a hell of a public relations problem out in the state. And I look at, you've had some great ads in your recruiting ads, very impressive, and it's maybe it need to be a little out of the box, because folk need to learn sometimes some positive things. There are no positive stories out there about the prison system. There just are none. It's tough enough. And you only hear from folk who really got bad stories. Very few people call and say, I finally got out, and thank you. But that public perception, and perception is reality. And we feel it in our districts, we feel it in the state. It's tough. And I appreciated everything. Your last statement kind of got my hair up a little, because it was bad. I just don't want to hear why it's so tough to build one when there's another one somewhere. I know we ain't gonna have the greatest prison in America. And and then we can address hopefully some of these issues, because even when you build a private plant, you got to deal with local zonings and commissioners and politics. So it's not easy to build anything. But it bothers me that it takes 2 years to build a prison that you've already got contracted. I'm not talking about getting through the contract, I'm talking about from digging the dirt, 2 years. It just seems very excessive to me.
I wish I could build it quicker. I feel you. I feel your pain on that one. Yes, sir. And this to touch on too, the public perception. I think that kind of goes back to our retention and our recruitment efforts. But I will tell you this, we work hard. There's a lot of good stories out there. I mean, and thank you to allow us to have this kind of platform to kind of share some of the things that we're doing. There's a lot more out there. One of the things, we pitch out, and we have a good communications team. Communications director Joan Heath is here with me today, and her team, we pitch those stories out to the media, but they told me to my face that good news stories don't sell, so they're not going to run them. Every once in a while, you might have a reporter or somebody like that may run a story, but I think it's just it's unfortunate, because when you sit down, and when I sit down, and I've talked to some of them face to face, I ask them what do they want out of the prison system. They say we want the same. They want prisoners to be safe, the staff to be safe, and Georgia to be safe. Well, how are you doing that when you're running negative ads every 5 minutes? And so I think if that's the goal of everybody collectively, we need that help too. We put out good stories on our social media pages and things of that nature. But again, I think the public perception, you're right, we have a lot of work to do, but I mean, it would take help not only internally from us, not creating negative stories that we self-inflict, but also the help from this body and others, and quite frankly, the media, to kind of help us in that effort too, because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for the state of Georgia. But I get their revenue generated. And so we just have to make sure that it's a balance there to make sure we change that perception.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you. Looking through and view, like,
Hey, try the mic next to you, see if that doesn't do any better. Your magnet, you must be magnetized or something right there.
sorry about that.
There you go.
I appreciate the presentation and the data, and it looks to me like for the rates of mortality and suicides, if you annualize the data for fiscal year 25, this is, I think, on slide 3 or 4, it looks like we're going to be at or above the fiscal year 24 numbers. So while it's lower in real numbers, we're only 4.5 months approximately into this fiscal year. And so one of the challenges that you listed and that we've heard about a lot about before is the more violent population. And one of your slides has more likely to commit violent acts while serving their sentence. Are there any specific drivers that you can share with us that influence that? Is it shared cells? Is it the issue of those that don't have parole for a long time? Or have you examined it in terms of what's driving the violence within the prisons themselves?
Yes, sir. So the what's driving it is several factors. Number one, you touched on it, is the roommates, cellmates. Majority of our homicides come from either cellmates, dorm mates, majority roommates, and it's oftentimes dealing with either gang related, contraband related, or criminal activity. Those three. This was the driving force of when you look at the motive behind the violence and or the homicides. That's what's driving it. But when you look at it, the majority of them are coming from cellmates.
And can you explain to me a little bit more about how the aging facilities are not designed for more violent offenders? I mean, we've had murderers in this state since our state was founded. So how is that different in terms of the violent offenders? Like, we've always had some really, for lack of a better description, bad apples, right?
Correct. I don't think you had the level of bad apples that you have today. Before they were kind of spread out. Now you take any of our level 5 prisons, over 90% of that population is violent, where back then it was probably 60% or less. So you have a lot more violent offenders in a area with, again, longer sentences. They're coming in with a lot younger and a lot more lengthier sentences. We're seeing, I think when I did the numbers last, and Cliff could probably just double check it, but the majority of our population are serving at anywhere between 20 plus years, life without parole, and UDS. So you're talking over 50% of the population that are that we have in our custody are serving at least 20 plus years or more, or serving life sentences. And I can let Assistant Commissioner Holt kind of expand on that a little bit more as well.
Criminal justice reform actually working, and the type of offenders that we allowed that were released at that time. Now the type of offenders that we're getting, as the commissioner said, are 20 plus years in terms of their service. When you look at the design of our facilities and where they are now, these facilities were built, many of them over 40 years ago, some of them back in the 60s. The design did not have air conditioning. The design did not have the ceiling structure or height. We weren't dealing with drones, or what I like to call unmanned aircraft, flying in actual tools. So we used to worry about self-constructed tools where they would take bits and pieces of the facility. Now they're flying in actual Dremel saws. They're flying in actual devices to help aid in them being able to cut out windows. Some of our older facilities have windows the size of the one that's directly behind you as they're opening to the facilities, where that's just not conducive to housing the type of inmates that we have now. The synthetic drugs that we're dealing with, leading to dual diagnosis and many things that they're willing to do. Our prisons are built in such a structure that we have to make sure that we're constantly hardening those things in order for them not to be able to destruct and get out of those facilities. Well, when you start bringing in actual tools to do that, then they're able to then cut that metal and utilize it as weapons against other inmates. So right now we're dealing with a much different population that we were dealing with. They're coming in a lot younger, a lot more violent, and also drug addicted. When you talk about what we're looking at in our new Washington State prison design, the whole thought process was how to deal with that population base. Prior to now, prisons were structured and specialized based on what they had going on. You had a lot of work release inmates. You had a lot of minimum medium security offenders that can go out and work into the community. Well, this population isn't fit for that, or in terms of being able to go out. Many of them are close security. Many of them have violent convictions. So now we have to build a prison that can house every type of inmate that we have, as opposed to having to move them from one location to another based on what their conviction is. So Washington State Prison is that thought process of building higher ceilings, building stronger locations, moving things, technology out of the way and out of the reach of offenders so that we can keep them from being able to get access to those things. But also putting education in their location so they have more opportunities for education, as you spoke to earlier, being able to mitigate some of that stuff. There is no one silver bullet to dealing with this offender population. So if we start looking at this cohesively, then we start to understand why our old prisons were not suited for what we're dealing with now and why a new facility is much needed.
Thank you. I was reviewing the reports on the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and in the most recent one, it looks like there were 819 reports, but only 57 were substantiated. The most were found to be unsubstantiated or unfounded. I'm curious to have an understanding as to the process. What constitutes it being substantiated? Is that when a person admits or there was a witness? Because the numbers of unfounded, unsubstantiated seem really high.
And I have Matt behind me, our director of the Office of Professional Standards, but I'll lead with this. All of our facilities undergo an assessment for PREA from the federal level each year, and all of them have passed successfully. So they do an excellent job, and many of them have also had high rates as it or accolades as it relates to the audit that was done from that PREA audit that they all do annually. There's also an internal audit that's done in that regard. There is a committee that is at every facility that addresses any PREA or prison accusation that can be done from a phone call from the outside. It can be done from anybody saying, hey, there's an issue here, the inmate themselves or another inmate that may observe it. Once that issue is reported, it goes into an investigation mode. We may have camera evidence to prove the incident. We may have camera evidence to disprove the incident. But it is then pushed over to our PREA unit. There's an actual PREA unit that is up under Matt's shop, Matt Wolf's shop, that goes into investigation of that incident as well. And Matt, do you want to talk about how that investigation takes place?
Hey, hit the button on your desk. Hit the red button so I know. Okay, there you go.
Check. So substantiated would mean that it was proven. Unfortunately, PREA is used often by inmates to get moved or to get a change of venue, a location many times. So substantiated would mean that it was proven.
Can you explain how? That's what I'm driving at. Is it somebody admits to it? Is there evidence?
Speaking to your mic. I know you're turning your head,
sorry.
but keep it mic in front of you.
Just like any other investigation, proven would mean that there was evidence of the crime that is accused.
If there's an alleged, I think maybe where you're going with this is if there's an alleged penetration of an offender, we actually send an inmate out to the hospital. If there is no sane nurse, if there's a sane nurse available, that sane nurse comes and does an examination and makes a determination to say to us in a similar way as they would in the public, hey, yes, there was penetration. This needs to be investigated further, or no, there are no indications of that. And then that information is given to our investigators so that they can take that course of action, whether that be criminal charges or whether that be them actually being disciplined at the facility level. Now, there are situations where we find that inmates, the incident did not occur, and we can look at video evidence to see that nobody ever entered that room or nobody ever entered that cell during that time. Inmates also are moved into protective custody status if need be, or inmates that are accused are moved to other facilities in order to allow for that inmate to not be put in harm's way. There's also designations that we put on those offenders to let us know who we're dealing with, those that have been victims of sexual aggression, those that have been aggressive. We track those offenders as well as those that are undetermined. So we know what place to put them in their safe housing in each location.
And to expand on that, and thanks for me to kind of walk through that check. And but also when you look at some of those, Slocum, you're thinking about what I talked about earlier, single man cells. So when Director Wolf was talking about change of venue or changing or trying to move locations, a lot of times they feel a lot safer if they're in protective custody. But we do investigate all crimes of alleged PREA. And just to expand on that, all of our investigators and special agents are trained. They went through the same exact training is a GBI. We just here recently this year created our own special agents academy. But it's the same curriculum as we use with GBI. We just tailor it towards the end, towards what we do. But previously, outside of this last class that graduated, all special agents were in the exact same GBI class with the GBI agents. So that's a level of investigations that we conduct as well.
Representative Holcomb, have you finished your cross-examination?
On that topic, I'm interested. I do have a couple of quick questions on health, if we can, because those have
Yeah, I'll
a
give you
bud-
two more. How
a
about that?
budget impact. If you could provide us with details on the chronic illnesses, and in particular, I'd be curious as to what the inmates had when they arrived versus what they developed over time, and if there are any trends to both of those. And then I went through the statutes on the penal institutions, and there are references to contagious diseases. I'm curious as to how big of a problem, if any, that is within the system. And of those, there are particular references to tuberculosis and HIV. Do we have problems with either of those in the system right now? Thank you.
Yeah, I can get that information to you, so I can get you that correct, accurate information. But you want to speak on?
Well, there are protocols in place similar to how we dealt with COVID during the time frame that existed pre-COVID, that dealt with influenza, that dealt with any other tuberculosis, chicken pox, whatever it is, HIV, and how we deal with that population in terms of getting the type of healthcare, hepatitis. There are protocols that exist in every function, every fair. I would defer to Randy in terms of our rates for the nation, but they do an excellent job of ensuring that we have no major exposures throughout the state. We have had incidents related to COVID where we have to quarantine, or tuberculosis where we have to quarantine, but protocols are put in place to trace those offenders and ensure that the staff as well as the offender are taken care of in that regard and are tested.
Representative Werkheiser.
Thank you. I'll be brief. As I've said many times, you've got the toughest job in state government. And I won't cross-examine you here. I usually do that privately. I've probably texted or called you more than all these folks combined, but you've always been accessible. You've got a tough job, but you're working on it. And we'll continue to work toward those ends. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you all for your participation. I'd like to say a few things. That anytime I've had a question for any of the corrections staff, as Representative Werkheiser says, I found them very approachable. If they don't know the answer, they'll get it. So anybody on this committee, if you have questions that you definitely want to follow up with, they are open to any discussion. It's not lost on anybody's eyes that, the three important safety measures that we talked about: safety of our public, safety of your employees, and safety of the prisoners. But they are inmates, convicts, and criminal offenders. They're not the average public. So we know that you have to handle them carefully. And because of that many of the things that we hear about and other things we've heard even more about are happening because they are that classification of person. It doesn't excuse it. It doesn't make it right, but it is part of the reason. I am looking forward to seeing the recommendations of the study that's being done by the governor's office that is contracted out. I'm looking forward to the recommendations that you have and the needs that you have, so we can make sure and hopefully can fund the improvements that you need. I think that we have been very supportive, if not overly supportive, of the needs you have technologically, because I do know that is a huge problem with the communications that they have with the outside world. One of the complaints I've read from an organization talks about the cost of the communications of making a call from the prison phone. And my answer was, oh, they still have those? I didn't know they needed them, because they can talk on a cell phone if they want to, which it's a problem. And we all know that, and we're going to do anything we can to help stop that. I don't think it's a level playing field when the federal government can stop it, but we can't. And then we get in trouble because they're communicating with the outside world and doing things just like they weren't incarcerated. So we need to do what we can to stop that. So I look forward to doing that and working with your organization on those recommendations. And I'm sure there probably going to be plenty. And I hope we can do what we need to do and even more. So I want to thank you for your presentation, for your cooperation with answering as many questions as you can today, and thank everybody on your team for being here and helping in all of this. We probably will have another meeting toward maybe that week before we come in. Sounds like I would really like to spend more time listening to you about your budget requests than some of the others that we get in those 2 or 3 days when it's like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I think you're going to have more attention to that than we'll need. Another thing, there's been in the news the last couple of weeks, the pilot program that's going on in Cobb County with the use of robots in their prison. I did contact that company, and I had asked them to come today to make a little, tell us what they're about. They could not. They were very thankful, but they probably will be at a meeting in December that y'all probably talk to them, but I'd love to see what their technology is and what it's all about, because I think with the issues you're having with holding employees, that could maybe possibly fill a void that you may have right now, that, that they could tell you what's going on. Are the prisoners in their cells? Are they alive? Are they behaving, or are they where they need to be? And because I know that's something that you got to have a personnel there to do that. So that being said, anybody else have anything? Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the participation, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.